This is a How to Make Remixes panel presented by Overclocked Remix. Hi, guys.
Come on in.
Come on in. Yay.
Just real quick, show of hands, how many people know what Overclock Remix is? All right, so most of y'all. Just the quick version of that, ocremix.org website, thousands, literally, of free video game remixes. Has been around for 19 years. We celebrate our 20th anniversary this year in December.
We are moving into our 20th year this year.
We're really old and crusty.
We've been doing it a long time.
Yeah.
Older than iPods.
We predate MAGFest.
Yes.
By a good margin.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyone can submit. We've got a panel of judges, and we post certain mixes, and we do panels, and we release albums, and a lot of cool video game music, arrangey type stuff. One of the things that's nice about OC Remix is that there's a lot of different genres on the site, and as of, I think, 2 years ago, you can actually sort by genres.
Yeah.
So while Nabil is going to be showing how to make a mix in one genre, there's everything on the site from jazz to classical to cinematic to dubstep to rap to pretty much whatever.
Usually when you hear the word remix, you think like techno music, but that's not all that we do.
They're really rearrangements.
When we say we, what we mean is the catalog that OC Remix presents to all you guys is made up of remixes from thousands of artists who have contributed to the site over the years. A lot of people who have come through the OC Remix community have gone on to very successful professional music careers. Like working on actual video games like Mass Effect and Call of Duty and these.
Call of Duty, yeah.
Big AAA.
How many people played Super Meat Boy? Yeah, okay. It's got the original Super Meat Boy. I mean, they redid the soundtrack for the different ports because there was some drama or something. But the original Super Meat Boy soundtrack by Danny Baranowski, who also did Binding of Isaac and Crypta the Necrodancer, he was actually a judge for OC Remix.
He was a staff member at OC Remix. He came through the site.
So this panel is basically giving you an idea of the basics of what's involved with making an arrangement, like the ones on OC Remix. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. It's going to be different for everybody, but we're going to try to cover as much of the basics as we can. Nabil's going to be making a mix as we talk and answer questions, so this is definitely going to be an interactive thing. But I think we'll probably just start off by covering some of the basic concepts.
Well, I think what we should first do is introduce ourselves. I am Sharik Ansari. I am better known as Dark Sword from OC Remix. I've done a whole bunch of remixes over the past couple of years. I don't do music professionally, but I have been doing amateur music since I was in high school, which is like over 20 years ago. So. And I've been a staff member on OC Remix for almost like 14, 15, maybe 16 years now.
Veteran staff.
Really long time. One of the oldest staff members still working on the site besides Dave.
Yeah, I would be the oldest since I started the site, I suppose. The original staff member in 1999. Also go by DJ Pretzel. All of my mixes for the first year of the site are terrible. Don't listen to them, please. But I have something like 60 or 70 mixes on the site and do administer the site in terms of running the web server and the design and the coding and everything. And that doesn't leave me a lot of time to make music anymore, but I try. And I released 2 tracks last year, which is actually a lot for me.
Yeah. And over to my left, we have...
My name is Nabil Ansari. I'm Sharik's brother. I go by the artist name Prism. I've been with OCR for like 10 years now, something like that.
Yep.
I worked on various albums, like the fighting game album Apex for a few years, and I contribute occasionally. Has anyone heard of Tangle Deep? So, not that many, but we did a Tangle Deep arranged album, and I was also on that. So you guys should go check that out. It's a 16-bit Square Enix RPG inspired and styled roguelike, which is really cool. And I'll be doing basically starting foundations of a mix to show what that process is like and trying to figure out musical ideas.
Yeah. Okay, so the way we always do this panel, how many people have been to this panel in the past couple of years? Okay, so you guys know that the way we usually do this panel is it's a dialogue. It's a Q&A kind of back and forth. We have a microphone set up front right here. So if you have a question on anything related to
what we're talking about,
getting into music, getting into making music. If you have questions about software or about music theory, we're going to do a back and forth style Q&A. Maybe to get started, Dave, what is your? You've been doing this for a long time.
True.
What is your? Oh yeah. Well, before we get started with that, Nabil, you're gonna be doing a mix while we're talking, and then we're gonna ask you some questions, and we'll check in with you to check out what you're working on.
Yeah.
So, what song from a video game are you going to be remixing for us today? In the past, we've done like stuff like Chrono Trigger and like Final Fantasy VI and like a lot of like the really popular stuff.
Yeah.
But I figured maybe this year we can try something a little bit different. So Nabil, what do you got?
I heard Deltarune is pretty popular nowadays, so I'm grabbing that battle track, Rude Buster it's called, I think. So I listened to that. I was trying to figure it out earlier today, so we're gonna see how it turns out. It's very much an iterative, experimental process, even for someone with a lot of experience.
You guys know Deltarune? Yeah.
Undertale, anyone?
Undertale, Deltarune.
Deltarune is kind of like the sequel.
Dollar Tune. Nabil, do you have the original of the song that you're going to remix? You want to play it?
Song, just for people who don't know it.
Oh, yeah.
Is that going to play? Do you have network?
Hang on, give me a second. I don't think I have.
Is it the right audio device?
Do I have to connect to the Wi-Fi?
Oh, no.
Keep talking.
Okay. Anyway,
Keep talking.
While
Kill
he's
time.
doing that, Dave, why don't you tell us how you got, what's your process for making music? How
Sure.
do you do it?
Well, a bit of a history lesson, I suppose. When I got started doing this 20 years ago, a lot of people were still arranging, and sequencing is another kind of term for arranging using an electronic device of some kind.
Unlock this.
Okay. So back when I got started, there were software sequencers, meaning like the type Nabil is using today, which is just a program runs on Windows, OS X. Nowadays, there are sequencers even for iPad and Android. But back 20 years ago, people would actually use like workstation keyboards that had hardware sequencers built in, and you would actually sequence on the device. So I got started doing stuff on an Ensoniq ASR10, which is, at the time, I think it costs $2,400. I got it instead of a car for my 16th birthday, which speaks to how much of a dork I was. But
You're a nerd.
And like in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, he actually has like a sampler, and I think he got a computer instead of a car. I forget. At any rate, it had a grand total of 2 megabytes of RAM, which, if you know, isn't a lot. And it loaded the entire operating system on floppy disk. But you would actually sequence and lay down each track bit by bit within the device. Nowadays, almost everyone, and like 99.9% of people, generally would use software like the type Nabil is using, which is called Digital Audio Workstation, or DAW, D-A-W. And it's an iterative process, but it's also a cumulative process. So what you'll do is you'll lay down a part. And that part, some people like to start with a bass line, some people like to start with drums, some people like to start with chords. There's no right answer, and sometimes it'll just depend on the song that you're arranging. But building a song in a sequencer is essentially a cumulative process of laying down a part, laying down another part, and building up patterns, and then arranging those patterns as bars of music over time, and iterating and experimenting and moving things around in a way that kind of makes sense. Modern digital audio workstations support something called plugins, and this allows them to extend out of the capabilities that they come with to support synthesizers and audio effects and MIDI devices, chords, things like that, arpeggiators that function as plugins on tracks. So the view you're looking at right now, essentially each one of those lines is a track dedicated to an instrument, or it could also be like audio that you would record from a microphone or a guitar. So you've got MIDI tracks, which is the sequenced note data, which would be going to a synthesizer or another type of plugin, and you've got audio tracks, which would be recorded audio from a vocalist, guitarist, or a live piano if you mic the piano. Or drum.
Or literally any other recorded audio.
Yeah, anything else. And all of that is laid out over time. So on the left is the beginning of the song, and on the far right would be the end of the song.
Yeah.
And when Nabil clicks play, there's a line that will move, essentially, and the song will play, and all of the tracks, all of those layers will play at the same time. You can mute individual layers so you can just hear that one layer. As you're going, that's actually helpful to isolate parts, and we'll have Nabil probably do that when he gets things working.
I think he's getting Wi-Fi.
Oh, he's getting some Wi-Fi. Okay.
So let's dial it back a little bit because we don't want to get too deep into the technical stuff right now. How many people here already make music?
Good question.
How many people don't make music but want to get into making music? Okay, so like basically 50, almost 50-50. Okay, cool. So, what am I about to say? I lost my train of thought. Oh.
Well, one thing I will say, kind of linking back to what I was saying, is now is a great time to make music because there's programs like the ones Nabil is using. There's demo versions, there's light versions, there's trials. There's a lot of free software out there that's very, very powerful. 20 years ago, you would pay like $2,000 to get software that nowadays you'll get for $40. So it's a great time to make music, and the programs these days make it a lot easier.
Okay, so what we have, Nabil, you have Runebuster.
Yeah.
You want to play it real quick?
Yeah.
All right, so this is the song that Nabil's going to work on while we're doing our Q&A. You guys got the general idea. You probably all played Deltarune before. It's like the new hotness. Okay, so what we're going to do, like I said, Q&A. So does anyone have any questions right off the bat? If you have a question, please come up to the microphone, and then we can talk about what you want to know. If you have any questions about if you have questions about DAWs, if you have questions about writing music, if you have questions about like how do you even get started, that kind of stuff. All right, we have some questions.
Okay,
Great.
cool.
So you mentioned maybe getting started.
Is
On?
Is
the
that mic on?
Doesn't look like it's on.
Oh no.
Hang on, I think just tap on it a little bit.
Ah, there we go.
Cool.
So you mentioned maybe starting with a bass line or a drum line. Do you ever start with a melody?
Yeah. Yeah, you can start with, you can start with anything. I've started with a melody before. Sometimes you come up with a melody. So the thing about melodies is that melodies by themselves can be anything, but then what you have to do is build around melodies in order to give them context, right? You want to give them musical context. In order to do that, you use chord progressions, bass lines, percussion in order to provide rhythm, tempo, and also just like where it's sitting in your harmonically, right? So you can start with a melody. A lot of times, that's what you'll start with, because if you're remixing a song from a video game, the thing that you remember is the melody, right? You listen to Mario, you ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba, you listen to that and you're like, okay, that's what I want to listen, that's what I want to remix, right? So
Right.
when you're writing an original piece of music, it's the same way. You might hear like a melody, or you might have an idea for a song in your head. You're like, okay, I'm going to write this melody, and then I can sit down and figure out the chords. I can figure out, what's the percussion beat I want to do. So yes, you can start with that. That's one way of doing it. Sometimes if you're just on the opposite end, what you can do is if you don't actually have an idea for a melody or a song that you want to write, and you just kind of want to jam a little bit, sometimes I'll start with a percussion. I'll sit down with my MIDI keyboard, and then I'll just load up a drum kit and my MIDI keyboard, and I'll start playing some drum beats on there, and I'll record them in, and then I'll figure out, what's a good bass line that'll work with this? And then I'll start like improvising a melody over it. And then sometimes I'll be like, oh, well, this might actually sound good with, the battle theme, the battle theme from Treasure Hunter G or something, and then I'll start doing that. And then I'll adjust my chords and I'll move, A lot of times when you're writing music, you don't have a 100% clear idea of what the end product is going to be.
Yeah.
So you start with maybe like 30%, and then you start evolving your ideas, and you see, like a lot of times you hear authors when they're writing about, like when they're talking about writing stories, they're like, oh, the characters tell me where to go with my story. It's kind of the same when you're writing music. You sit down, you have these sounds, you're like, oh, this chord sounds cool, maybe I can do something with this. Or maybe if I modulate, if I, move up to like, from like a, an A minor to like a B flat major or something, it's like, oh, that's a cool like little like modulation, that's an interesting little color. And then you start adjusting your melody, and then you go in that direction. So what you can do is you can start with your melody, or you can start with the bass line to kind of get a groove, or you can start with the percussion, or you can kind of just like noodle around on a piano. there's a lot of different ways to get started. Nothing is wrong.
And what I'd add to that is a lot of times, to answer your question, especially in terms of like sitting down and starting a song, especially an arrangement, 9 times out of 10, I will have the melody in my mind and what I want to do with it in my mind too. So if I'm arranging a song that I already know, I already have a melodic twist. Maybe it's just changing the time signature and adapting the rhythm to that, or changing the key, or changing the genre in a way that would change the melody. But that's not usually the first thing I record, that I actually sequence. So there's 2 different things there. It might be the first thing that I do when I sit down to play, just to figure out what the notes are. But then when I actually start recording and layering things, I usually won't start with a melody because I want to get a progression down that I know will work with that melody. And I don't know, with melodies in particular, the sound choice is really, really crucial. With pads and drums, you can usually swap a lot of different things in there, and a lot of it will work. With a melody, like if you're going to do piano versus synthesizer versus an instrument, for example, like flute that's monophonic, it technically only plays 1 note at a time, although you can do overtones and fancy stuff. But your lead melody is a decision that you're going to have to make. The sound that you use for that at some point, you don't really want to make that decision right out of the gate. So I guess I would think about the melody first, but it wouldn't be the first part that I've recorded. That's how I work. A lot of people that I know do like bass and drums first. It is a sort of an industry standard like songwriting thing, but there's no one right way to do it.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thanks.
Sure.
Coming from the exact opposite direction, as somebody with a lot of melody and harmony training but no percussive training at all, can you give some tips as to what goes into a really good percussion part or a really good drum part?
Buy Superior Drummer 3 from TuneTrack.
Well, there's that. But also, what you can do with percussion is, first, what you want to do is you want to, and this is kind of a general piece of advice just for being a composer or being an arranger, you want to listen to a lot of different kinds of music. What that'll do is that'll give you sort of a library in your mind to pull from when you're writing. So you can say, well, I've got this song, and I want this kind of groove. What's a song that I know that does that, right? So you can say, oh, like there's some bossa nova stuff that I like, that maybe I'll pull that out, or maybe some like metal, or some like proggy kind of like stuff with really complicated stuff. I would say you want to have a good foundational knowledge of different genres in order to be able to replicate those drum patterns. Another thing which really helps is think about filling in the spaces. So when you're writing something like with a kick and a snare, standard drum is like kick, snare, and then maybe like some hats, and then cymbals and toms to fill in spaces and stuff. So when you have like a right, you want to fill in the spaces like. See how those cymbals are sort of filling in the spaces.
Right.
And then you can do a lot of different things. For example, if you're sequencing your drums, one thing that really helps is ghost notes. And ghost notes are essentially like you've got your snare, but like really quiet and filling in the spaces. And that adds sort of like body and like texture to your drum track. So that can really help with drums. But I would say if you have trouble writing percussion and percussion grooves, one thing you can do, definitely listen to a lot of music, get a library in your head that you can reference, listen to a lot of different kinds. Also, just if you're programming your drums, play around a lot with like different like loops and listen to loops, listen to drum loops. Also, don't be afraid of using drum loops. There's kind of like a stigma among like some older like musicians, like, oh, you shouldn't use drum loops. You should just write everything yourself. It's fine. You can use drum loops. That's what they're there for.
It depends on the genre somewhat.
Yeah,
a lot of this advice depends on the genre.
Yeah.
So like just out of a curiosity, do you have a genre of choice or just
Probably a lot of jazz, I think.
Jazz
Arrangements.
Okay,
Yeah.
Jazz is hard.
Yeah.
Yes, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, just listen to a lot, and then try to like isolate. Another general piece of advice that I always give every year when I do this panel is learn to listen critically and isolate parts when you're listening to music. So if you're listening to something by, some old swing stuff by Basie, or maybe some Thelonious Monk or something, sit down and don't pay attention to the bass line and the melody and the comping piano or whatever. Focus in on the percussion.
Yeah, decompose, deconstruct the song, and
listen to what the drummer's doing. Think about what he's doing with his hands. You're hearing that, you're like, oh, he's doing this kind of groove, and he's hitting on these certain beats, and he's accenting certain, the upbeat of 2, and he's doing this.
I guess watch Whiplash a couple times and you're good to go.
Yeah. So there's those things you can do to sort of get a better sense of also maybe make friends with a drummer and just pick their brain. That also helps.
Well, one thing for jazz specific, so there's production tips that we could give you that are EDM specific. For example, if Andy Zircon were here and you were asking for EDM advice, I know his number one drum thing is layer. Never just have a snare by itself, layer that snare with another snare, so it just builds a lot of impact. Not relevant to jazz, unfortunately. Side chaining, not particularly relevant to jazz. But what I can say that is more or less relevant to jazz is you can quantize a drum part, but for jazz, that's usually going to sound very bad.
Yeah,
however,
very robotic.
What DAWs will let you do after the fact is, one, adjust the shuffle, which is good, swing. Adding in a percentage of swing is going to make almost any drum part sound a little bit more naturalistic. And then most modern DAWs, almost all of them, have a humanize function, where what it'll do is, first you take a drum part that you played in, because for jazz, you probably want to play it in. I wouldn't necessarily.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah. So you play it in, it's probably, if you're like me, very sloppy. You quantize it, then it just becomes too robotic, and what Humanize lets you do is inject back in a little bit of randomness, and you can control that too.
Yeah.
So you could say 100% humanized is probably going to sound more like it originally did when you recorded it, but 10% adds just that little bit of shift. So it's a little bit ahead or a little bit behind of the beat, but just a tad, and that's good for more naturalistic genres like jazz.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's humanizing and quantizing. Also, for jazz drums, just use a lot of ride cymbal, honestly, and you'll be fine.
Walking bass and a ride cymbal, and you're done.
That's the dumb answer. Just use a lot of ride cymbal, but it works, so that
Great.
helps.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Sure.
Hey, so when you start in on a remix, what kind of components do you look at in a melody to say this is a good thing to remix, or this would lend itself really well to being translated to this other genre, as opposed to just, do you ever kind of come across songs that you look and go I don't know if I could really make that
Do anything with it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely. I mean, I'd like to think in terms of infinite possibility and probability that any given song can be adapted to any given genre, and I'm sure it can, but not well. Certain types of melodies, if you change the time signature or the key too much, you'll just get too far away or it won't work. The Skies of Arcadia album that we just released, I did an arrangement of a song, and originally I was going to take it even further away from the source, and I had to reel it back in and stick closer because it just wasn't functioning. In terms of what I look for in a melody, just personally, I look for a melody that's catchy, and a lot of times the arrangement or interpretation part of it is just me remembering it wrong. So I have it in my head one way, I go back and listen to it, and I'm like, oh wow, I had that wrong, but I like my way, and that becomes the arrangement. So having a bad memory can actually really help.
Yeah, one thing about it is it all comes down to also a matter of taste for the musician and the arranger and the composer. I'll sit down and I'll look at a song from Final Fantasy VI or something, and I'm like, I don't think I can do anything with this. But there's already 15 remixes of it on OCR or on YouTube or anywhere. So there's definitely that. It's just if you're just not feeling a song, it's just I just can't figure out a good way to get in. Sometimes that'll just stop you from remixing it. But other times you look at a piece of music and you're like, oh, I know exactly what I want to do with that. I know exactly what I want to do with that. And then you execute on that almost 95% to what you wanted to do. So it goes back and forth. It depends on the song. It depends on the arranger. It comes from listening to a lot of music and having that vocabulary of what you grew up with. I will say that older video game music is easier to adapt to more because it is essentially, it is simpler in terms of part writing, especially old NES music and old Sega Master System, even Super Nintendo and Genesis stuff. Not a lot of voices.
That's true.
Not a lot of voices. I think on Super Nintendo it's like at most maybe 8. I think 8 or 16.
The SPC.
Yeah, it's like either 8 or 16,
Yeah.
and then like for Nintendo it's like 4 or 5. Maybe if you're using a Famicom disk system, it's like more, but like it's not a lot of voicing. So it's easier to just like blow that out into like all these different kinds of things. Melodies are more straightforward, especially if you look at like the Mega Man series. Pretty straightforward melodies that can be adapted into a lot of different genres. Generally rock, a lot of electronic stuff, but you get people who get like orchestral and piano and all this stuff with Mega Man stuff. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I guess the corollary to that is that's why there's a million remixes of Song of Storms that like everyone's cut their teeth doing.
Yeah,
the Song of Storms version.
Song of Storms is something you see a lot because it's a very simple song. All the ocarina themes from Ocarina of Time are very short, so it's really easy to like expand them out.
There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of directions you can take in it. It doesn't. The nature of the melody itself doesn't really push you too much in one direction or the other.
I mean, Song of Storms is it's 3/4. It's pretty hard. Like waltz, like you could just like, oh, this is waltz. But also like, there's a lot of like really dubsteppy kind of like stuff, triplet feel electronic music that you hear for Song of Storms like all the time.
You can unwaltz it.
Yeah.
It's been done.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks.
Sure.
Sure.
Hi.
Hey.
What would you guys recommend for someone who has no experience in music but like wants to get involved in making it?
Right. Okay. So this is a good question. There's a lot of different things you can do. First thing you can do is just jump in head first. Download like a demo for something for a DAW, like maybe Reaper or FL Studio, or I think Ableton has like a demo.
Well, even if you're just getting started and you're on a Mac, GarageBand's pretty
Yeah,
good. Or if you have an
GarageBand.
iPad, GarageBand is also pretty good.
Yeah.
The mobile apps, I wouldn't rule them out. There's no problem getting started on a simple like $10 mobile app just to learn the concepts, because a lot of the concepts
Yeah.
are going to be the same between a $10 app and a $300, DAW like the one.
I would also say
feels
if you don't want to just jump in blindly, there's a lot of stuff on YouTube that you can look up. I would recommend maybe, are you still in school? Are you still in college?
I am. I'm a singer actually.
Okay, you're in high school. Okay, perfect. Okay, so when you go to college, if you decide to go to college, or even if you don't, you can take a community college class. Take like a music class, like a music appreciation class. Music appreciation classes generally will give you like a really, really basic idea of music theory. You'll learn about what chords are, what intervals are, scales, like a really, really baseline. And what that'll do is that'll give you like a vocabulary, so that when you listen to music, and then you can sit down at like a keyboard or something, like a little cheap MIDI keyboard or like a piano or something, just sit down and you can be like, oh, I think I understand how this melody is constructed. This is a fourth, this is a fifth, this is what an interval is. This is what the chord progression is. You probably don't know what those words mean right now, but if you take like a music theory course or a music appreciation course at like a local college, that can really give you a good understanding of that. And then what you can do is you can get into writing music. Another thing would be take some piano lessons or guitar lessons. That's another, like learning an instrument. We are talking a lot about electronic stuff and DAWs and like all of this stuff, but learning an instrument is a great way to get into writing music. Are you like in band or anything in high school, or did you ever do that stuff?
No, I just sing for my friend's band. That's it.
Yeah, so I mean, it's never too late to learn an instrument. You can just like take a guitar class or something. That'll give you a good knowledge of like, because guitar is all like chords, and you're playing chords and scales and stuff. It's a lot of music theory. So you will actually learn that stuff while you learn to play an instrument. You can learn a lot of this stuff. There's a ton of stuff on YouTube, like music theory courses, and there's a lot of resources online that you can learn. So I would say try to get a general knowledge of like a little bit of music theory, just like what's a chord, what's an interval, what's a scale, what does that mean, what's harmony. What does that mean?
Time signature.
Right?
Yeah.
Time, meter, that stuff. Those are really basic concepts. And there's a lot of ways to learn that. Online tutorials, taking a class at a local school, guitar lessons, piano lessons, that kind of thing. Or just dive in head first, download a demo for a GarageBand or like FL Studio, Reaper, Ableton, something, and then just start playing around like fiddle with the knobs, you know, load up some synthesizers or something. What kind of phone do you have? Android, iOS?
iPhone. Yeah,
An iPhone?
iOS.
iPhone? Mm-hmm. Perfect. So here's the thing about iPhone. iOS has an incredible music ecosystem. Mm-hmm. There's tons of apps, free apps that you can download and play with and use music. There's an app called Figure. You should download this. Figure, it's free. There's Groovebox and there's Launchpad. You can download those for free. There's also Arpist, which is kind of cool. Lets you do arpeggios and stuff. It's a little advanced. Probably don't want to get into it right now. There's also Sound Prism, which is a really cool. It's kind of like a keyboard, except it like does harmony for you. So you can get that. There's also Loopy, which is a looping app, which is you sing into it, and then what you do is you just tap it, and then it repeats what you just sang, and then you sing again, and you loop it. So you can beatbox into your phone, and then you loop, and then you sing the bass line, and basically you create like a thing on your phone.
It's not free, but there's also Korg Gadget, which I think is $15.
Yeah, Gadget is
it's very powerful.
It's free to download
for a mobile app.
Yeah. So if you have like an iPad or an iPhone, you are in luck. Android, not so much, but because their music, the audio layer in Android is not as mature as iOS is. But iOS is actually incredible for music, and there's a lot of free apps for you can use to make music on your phone.
Yeah.
So
I get started there.
Tons of ways to get into it.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Sure.
How do I sound? Okay. Thank you so much for having the panel. In my personal experience, even though you kind of touched on it, when I'm working on one of these workstations, I get lost very quickly. I haven't learned it enough. It's almost the same as learning a new instrument. So my first question would be, what is, in your opinions, either one with a very kind user interface or a good way to learn it or at a reasonable pace? And then I'll follow that also, just if you can talk about sound forms and waves at all, and if you take that into consideration.
Sure.
I think Korg Gadget actually is a pretty streamlined interface, but GarageBand is free with OS X, and it's free with iPad too, right? Or iOS?
Yeah, it's free with iPad.
GarageBand is as streamlined as it gets without reducing functionality too much. You can still make a really good song in GarageBand, and so if that's an option, I would strongly recommend that.
Yeah.
Have you tried it?
Do you have one for not Mac?
For not Mac?
Yeah.
For not Mac.
So
exactly.
So I've been using FL Studio, formerly known as Fruity Loops, for a long time, for as long as I can remember, really. So there are other ones. Some people would argue there are better ones. I like the interface for FL Studio a lot. It's pretty straightforward. You just open it up. You have a blank template. Have you used it before?
Yeah.
It's pretty straightforward. There's lots of people who use it, and there's a lot of tutorials online. One of the guys who is heavily involved in OC Remix, Andrew Versa, also known as Zircon, he actually did a 90-minute FL Studio, like introductory FL Studio tutorial. I think it cost a little bit of money to buy. I don't remember where it is, but it's a FL Studio tutorial by him.
MacProVideo.com.
MacProVideo.com.
But it's for PC.
Yeah, I mean, FL Studio is on PC and Mac now, but
True.
It's I like that one a lot. It's very straightforward, and it's come a long way. They finally added time signature support, where you can switch time signatures like in the middle of the song, which
I kind of
do like for years, but they finally did it in FL Studio 20.
I don't know. I kind of have to. I mean, to me, I disagree, just because FL Studio seems alien to me. FL Studio is nice, and for people that it clicks with, it clicks. But it's very different from all the other DAWs.
Yes,
So you
that's
can't
true.
really switch between it and anything else without having to learn something else. Whereas Studio One, very similar to Cubase. Very similar to, I guess, I would say Logic, and also somewhat similar to Ableton and Reason.
Yeah.
Have you tried Reason?
No, I haven't.
Reason's nice because you don't have to worry about plugins. I mean, it supports plugins now as of version 9.5. Actually, an ex-OC Remix judge, Matthias Hagstrom-Gert, He's got albums on the site. He was a judge. He now works for Propellerheads on the Reason team. And I think he was part of why they started supporting VST. But the nice thing about Reason is you get it. It has a lot of instruments built in. It's kind of like in GarageBand in that way. And it is somewhat streamlined. So you might give that a shot. Unfortunately, the best streamlined DAW options are, at the moment, sort of Apple leaning.
Yeah. I will also say maybe check out Reaper as well. Reaper is a good one. It's also, so here's the thing about Reaper.
It's powerful, but it's hard to use.
When you download Reaper, you don't have to pay for it.
True.
But they will ask you to pay for it. Like, they'll never lock you out from using it, but it does cost money. But Reaper's pretty good. But I mean, I'm FL Studio for life. I'm always gonna.
You know what we haven't talked about is there are now 5 or 10 years ago. Well, 5 years ago these existed, but they were kind of lame. Nowadays there are actually good digital audio workstations in the browser.
Yes.
So you don't even need to install a program. You don't need anything other than like Chrome, because Chrome is kind of like the de facto for this sort of stuff.
Chrome or Firefox. Yeah.
Slower in Firefox. Chrome supports DAWs that will actually let you lay down tracks. They are more streamlined by virtue of being in the browser. They don't have the same functionality.
So there's one you can check out. I've used it a couple times. It's called Audio Tool. That's a really cool one. You open it up, you start a project, and you have a whole bunch of modules, and you just drop them in, and you kind of like wire them together. It's very visual. It's pretty cool. And then you sort of like connect different modules together, and then you route sound through effects modules and stuff. It's really cool. Audio Tool has actually been around for a long time, even when like Make Beats Online was like some lame dumb thing that people used to like, But now it's just like, yeah, you can actually make beats online, and it's very powerful. They have really good interfaces, and you don't have to install anything. So that's a good one. Audio Tool is a really good one.
Furthermore, I mean, if you look at the trajectory of how things tend to be going, it's likely that browser-based digital audio workstations are just going to get better and better.
Yeah.
We really were making fun of them 5 years ago because they were awful, but I mean, wait 5 years and web and browser and W3C.
Yeah. Audio Tool is amazing.
Yeah,
it
and
really
just Google browser digital audio workstation, and you'll probably get some other good results too now. So that might be a good place to start, because those are going to be more streamlined, at least for now.
Yeah. And the thing is, just try a whole bunch and see what works for you. I think that's what really boils down to, because I talked to some people who use FL Studio. They've been using it for like 3 years, and they still don't know what the playlist is. And I'm like, what? Like, that's how you use it. And they just never explore. They just don't know. It's like, and they're probably more suited to something else.
All right.
Does that answer the question?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Great. Cool. Thanks.
Hey guys.
What's up?
Oh.
Hey, so as a composer, why make remixes for OC Remix when you spend most of your time primarily writing original music? And do you feel like that takes away from original writing at all?
Well, I'm not much of a composer. It's been said.
So the thing is, first question is, why write music for OC Remix when you could be just writing original music?
Sure.
No reason, really. I mean, if you like video game music and you want to interpret it in a certain way, then you arrange it. Arranging is a very old art form.
Well, when you compose, you are arranging. Even when you're composing an original piece, you're fleshing it out. You're doing some of the same things. So to think of composition and arrangement as two totally different things and never the twain shall meet, I think is kind of a faulty premise to begin with.
Right.
I mean, you will get better at composition through arrangement.
Yeah.
Or else you're doing it wrong.
So when you take composition classes in school, I took some in high school, so because I was really into I used to play trumpet, and I was like a big band geek in high school. I wanted to get into writing music because I had like some MIDI sequencers that I was like playing around with, and I wanted to like know more. So I took some composition classes, and the first thing that they had us do was not write an original piece of music. It was arrange a piece of music. So we were given a piano piece. We were given the sheet music for this is a sheet music for a piano piece. Mine was arabesque. And my teacher said, arrange this for clarinet choir. Here are the parts you have to arrange it for, and now adapt this for this. And what that does is it takes away all the hard stuff. It takes away the stuff where it's like, what's that note? What's that chord? What's the interval? Like, what time signature is this in? Because when you sit down to write an original piece of music, maybe it only takes like 3 seconds, but you still have to sit there and figure out what's going on in your head before you translate it to paper or to your DAW or whatever, right? But when you already have it in front of you, when you know, oh, this song is in 4/4 because I see it on the page. It says 4/4. It's in the key of C minor. It's this, it's that, it's whatever. Okay? Then you can be like, okay, now I'm going to take this and I'm going to adapt these parts. It's the same with arranging. Even if you're doing things by ear, because it's already there, you can sit there and you can be like, okay, this is what the bass line is. This is what the lead is. This is what the pads are doing. Let me just arrange it, change it, move it around. So what that does is that actually feeds into your skills. It hones your skills, and it allows you to become a better composer of original music. Okay? Arranging teaches you how to be a better composer.
Yeah.
So why do it? It's good practice. It's very good practice.
I mean, hopefully the answer is because you want to,
Yeah.
because you're inspired and you have something to say. I mean, there's another question, like a corollary to that, is why arrange video game music and submit it to OC Remix for free when you could license it and then sell it and make $1 zillion? That's kind of a different point of inquiry, I would say. Yours is more like the composition versus arrangement sort of relationship.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can improve your workflow. I might also add, a lot of remixers on the site will tell us they started off writing an original, and as Sharik just kind of described, it turned into an arrangement. Well, the opposite can happen too. You can sit down to arrange video game music and be like, this really isn't working, I'm just going to turn this into an original. So I think it's really, really healthy to think of that relationship between composition and arrangement as very flexible and interchangeable.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi.
So I'm a small remixer on YouTube, and I've been doing it for a couple of years.
Sure.
And I feel like every time I make a remix, it like gets better and better, and then like I'm like almost there, and I don't really know how to like master a song.
Mm-hmm.
I think I have mixing down kind of, but like mastering just confuses me. Like, do you have any general tips on like where to start?
Mastering. Nabil would know.
That's Nabil's wheelhouse, I think.
You want to pause a little bit? We have a question about like how to master a track.
So
Like, generally.
So it's better to look at the context of what mastering is in music recording history. Mastering is something traditionally done as like preparation for printing onto like a vinyl record, printing onto now on like CDs and stuff. And they had more technical concerns, like for vinyl, you couldn't have too much bass, otherwise it would put too much of a groove in the record and it would actually damage it. Now mastering is something that's more of like ensuring like a consistent sonic identity across your tracks. But I don't really think mastering is something you should be too concerned about on like a single track. If you have like an album that you want to put out, or an EP, or any like group of tracks that you're releasing, then basically what you want to do is you want to render those out as like final renders, basically. Import them into a new project, and then you want to listen to each one, basically comparing, and you can use like an EQ or something like that shows you the frequency graph, and you want to compare like, is this song a lot brighter than this song, or is this song like have more like thumping mid-range, and then this song is like very like sparse in the mid-range, and then you'll apply like very subtle effects on each one to try and get them sounding very similar. And there's also plugins that make this easier too.
And I just wanted to talk briefly about like mixing and mastering and the difference between the two. Mastering is kind of what Nabil's just described, but you may have meant also just mixing as well, which is even on a given track, forget if it's on an album or not, there still has to be a good balance of elements. You don't want it to be too muddy. You don't want it to be too tinny and have no low end. So there's just, you want a good frequency spectrum. Obviously, it can't be super, super quiet, but you also don't want it to be clipping. And like when you view the waveform in an editor, it's just all like maxed out the whole time. Although you see that a lot in the EDM world.
Yep.
Whatever.
Yep.
Not so much in the jazz and classical, realms. So one of the things people will always say, it's like a go-to bit of advice is doing the car test, which I don't know if you've done this, but you take your song and you listen to it in a car, on car stereo speakers. And what that does is it lets you hear what your mix sounds like in a suboptimal sort of lowest common denominator type of scenario. If it doesn't sound good in the car, you got to fix it so that it sounds good in as many places as possible. Nabil mentioned some plugins. These aren't cheap. Not all of these are cheap. There's something called Mix Checker from Audified. For plugins, my go-to site is pluginboutique.com. They're British, but they have deals sometimes where you can get like 8 different plugins for $1. Their Black Friday sales are crazy, so if you want one like URL bit of advice, Plugin Boutique is a really good website for sales. Mix Checker, I think, was $30 at one point. And what it will do is it'll actually do the car test for you. It'll on your computer, try to emulate what your mix sounds like through car speakers, through like crappy headphones, like Radio Shack, whatever, through a telephone. It has different buttons you just press and alter it up. So that's a good thing to do. Get in the habit of listening to your song before you release it on a variety of devices, headphones, speakers, and also, if you can, car or crappy headphones, or get this plugin. There's also another plugin called Expose by Mastering the Mix, and what it will do is it'll show you the waveform, and any area that it highlights in red, it thinks is not mastered well in terms of clipping or average volume or things like that, and it'll actually tell you why. So there's been a lot of attempts at trying to make mastering much more accessible recently. In the last 2 or 3 years, a lot of these plugins, Mix Checker is relatively new, Expose is relatively new, and they're not even that expensive. And sometimes if you catch them on sale, they're $15, less than a game. So those are good places to start in the software realm, but even if you don't want to pay a cent, you can just listen to it in your car or through different types of sets of speakers. There's also nowadays, there's a mastering service called Landr, Landr, which will automatically master your mixes. I honestly can't recommend it because I've never used it, but it may be worth a try.
Sounds a lot like Soundgoodizer.
Soundgoodizer. Yeah, there are a lot of plugins that go a long way towards fixing specifically a muddy mix, and that's a lot of mixes. That's the problem. It's muddy. There's not a high end. There's not that air that you want. And I use BBE Sonic Maximizer, which again, you're not talking like super high end. I think it's $50. And it's like Soundgoodizer. It's like a single knob or maybe like 3 knobs, and you just tweak them, and you can like up the bass. There's a lot of plugins like that.
Yeah.
Find one that you like after demoing a few, and just learn to use it. But it's better now than it's been, like, again, 10 years ago, there weren't these types of cheap, very, very easy to use tools, so.
I will also add, stepping away a little bit from the technical solutions, a lot of times you can solve a problem that you're having in your mix by adjusting your part writing itself.
True.
That's really important to keep in mind.
That's probably one of the most important lessons anyone can learn.
Yeah.
Is that the writing is what dictates how things come together.
Yeah. If you have a lot of your instruments just all playing right in the same octave, it's going to be crowded in that spectrum, on your frequency spectrum.
Panning can fix that
if
to a
you
certain
can use
extent.
stereo separation, but if you have like a lot of stuff in the bass happening, that's just gonna be crowded, and it's gonna be muddy, and that's so it also helps to just make sure that your part writing is spread out a little bit more. If you're having problems with like muddiness or like a lot of like crowded spectrum,
It's worth
that
talking,
also helps.
Yeah, I mean, crowding the spectrum is definitely a thing, but it is actually worth talking just briefly about panning. Just layman's description. Obviously, in a stereo mix, you've got far left, you've got far right, and then you've got everything in between. And if you have, for example, a duet going on, you generally speaking don't want both of those parts dead center because they'll just overlap and they'll be hard to discern for the listener. And so panning one a little bit left, a little bit right. There are standard panning positions for certain types of instruments, especially in the percussive and bass realms. It's very strange, although it was popular in the 50s and 60s, to pan your bass like far left. You just don't hear that a lot. right?
Yeah.
So if you do that, you really have to have a good reason why.
Generally speaking, nowadays you don't hard pan anything like right to the
Unless it's ironic or you're doing
unless
surf
it's
rock
like
or something.
very
yeah.
specific like genre emulation, or like you're doing some cool effects where like the sound bounces between two ears or something. Generally speaking, you kind of have it like a little bit closer to center.
So did we answer the question?
Yeah.
Hopefully that answers. That was like a big answer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hopefully
cool,
that
thanks.
covered it. Yeah.
Hey.
Hey.
So first off, I just want to say like I've gotten a lot of value out of Overclock Remix over the years. So thank you for your roles in that. Relics of the Chozo. Yes.
Yeah.
This is going to make it sound like I have a lot more knowledge than I do. But how do you deal with the issue of humanization, avoiding a sound font, sounding the same like you're
Right.
like a font?
Okay. So
How
big
do you
thing in
actually-
humanization, velocities. That's a huge thing. What is a velocity? Velocity is how loud the note is, right? It's not the volume of the instrument, right? It's how loud you are actually playing the note. So if you're on a piano, it's how hard you press the piano. If you're playing like a brass instrument or a wind instrument, it's how you blow the air. Is it really loud? Are you blowing a lot of air or just a little air? Right? That's the velocity, right? The volume of an instrument is something that's different. It's basically like the entire volume of the instrument. You can just turn it down, right? So that's a big thing, right? Because when people play notes in succession, they don't play them all the same velocity. So that's a huge thing. So you want to mess with those, right? Now, one thing that really helps is look at the quality of your sample. If you're using old sound fonts, okay, now I use sound fonts forever, okay? I only just recently, in the past maybe 5 years or so, started using like sample libraries that are like professional grade that I paid for and bought with a lot of money. Most of my remixes on Overclocked Remix are free sound fonts that I found online. And because they are free sound fonts that I found online, they are of varying quality. Some of them are really crappy. Some of them are like pretty good, all things considered. So the thing is, when you write using a sample, this is really important. Let's say you have a trumpet sound font. You are not writing a part for a trumpet player when you use a trumpet sound font. You are writing a part for a trumpet sound font. So you have to know what your samples are capable of and what is their what are the boundaries? It's the same way if you're sitting down and writing a piece for a group of real live instrumentalists. You know that you can't write in a trumpet part, you can't write like this really, really, really high note.
Dizzy Gillespie is not going to happen, yeah.
This really, 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 really low note because the trumpet player just can't do that. Or it's going to be really, really hard for him to do that or her to do that.
Or like write for piano with 3 hands.
Right, exactly. You have to remember a piano player only has 10 fingers, right? So you can't, write these really complicated.
You can cheat a lot with piano.
You can cheat with piano a little bit because people don't really, but generally speaking, you have to kind of. So if you're talking about humanization, you want to think about what is a human capable of, first of all, and then you also have to think about what is your sample capable of. I keep saying sampleable. Your sample is capable of, right? So you have to think about the boundaries. So velocities are really important, and using a velocity-sensitive sample library or sample pack will help a lot, which means normally, like a really old sound font, if you play a C, it's just a C on that instrument. But a velocity-sensitive or velocity-aware like sample will be if you play a C really loudly, it will play one sample, and if you play a C quietly, it'll play a different sample. It'll play one where they recorded it, the trumpet player playing the C a lot quieter, right? So you have those velocity layers.
So are you asking, from a humanization perspective, I'm just wondering if you're asking more about the samples and the sounds or about the composition and the...
More about sound.
More about the sounds, okay.
Yeah, so this is really about sequencing, right? Because what are you doing when you're sequencing? When you are sitting down at your DAW and you are sequencing a part and you're using a sample, you are creating a performance, right? Because you are not writing this, printing out sheet music and giving it to someone to play. Ideally, you could do that, right? But session musicians, they cost a lot of money, as they should. They're very skilled people. They should be paid what they deserve, right? But we're not all rich,
right? We have limited funds. That's why we use sample libraries sometimes, because we can't afford a session musician. So you sit down, you're creating a performance. That's what sequencing is. You are creating a performance using samples, using effects, using all this stuff. Humanizing is part of that sequencing, and that is what, like Dave talked about before, sort of adjusting timing of notes. So you really have to sort of get in the mindset, think about how the instrumentalist would play that instrument to begin with.
Well, are you mouse entering, or are you actually playing a keyboard?
So I haven't spent enough time doing it to justify, buying a keyboard. So yeah, this is purely on a computer.
Because humanization, in terms of like a performance, like Shark says, I mean, it is much easier in my mind to actually play something in, because you will get, just by virtue of, you know, you're not a robot, you'll get some humanization because you're a human. Whereas if you mouse enter things, you really have to do a little bit more work after the fact to sort of achieve that effect. So I will say, like, getting a velocity-sensitive MIDI controller, you can get one for less than $100 on eBay.
They're so cheap.
Yeah.
Any specific brand or model recommendations?
Akai, Novation.
M-Audio.
M-Audio.
Still not bad.
Akai, Novation, M-Audio.
Yeah. You can look on Amazon. You can buy them on Amazon. You can buy them on.
Maybe just not Behringer. They're mostly good. I mean, there's a lot of great options. I tend to trust Amazon, and Sweetwater is a music site that sells stuff. Their reviews are pretty good.
Okay.
You don't need Aftertouch, you just need velocity, but you definitely need velocity. Aftertouch is a little bit fancy and probably beyond the scope of this conversation.
Yeah.
So playing in a part is a really easy way to get like free humanization, because again, you're a human. If you're mouse entering, then you need to worry about automation and velocities. And
I mouse enter pretty much everything that I do. I play very little. I have MIDI controller. I have 2 MIDI controllers.
I also mostly do mouse entry.
Yeah, he has this giant, look at this, he's got this giant keyboard up here, and he's just said he mostly does mouse entry. So, like, you know, there's a lot of tools in DAWs that also help you humanize. There's shuffle, there's a lot of like shuffle patterns, randomizers, strum tools, which basically like take a chord and kind of like splay it out a little bit so it sounds like a guitar strum.
Well, if you listen to Nabil's soundtrack to this game that he's working on, Soul, S-O-L-E, they were demoing it, I think, earlier today, or they will be tomorrow, I forget. It sounds very human. It sounds very organic. And one of the things he's doing there is, because he just said he mouse enters everything, one of the tricks he's doing there, which is a good one, is automating the tempo. So in a lot of genres like EDM, generally speaking, the tempo will remain static throughout. But if you're going for a humanized performance in something more like classical or jazz, automating the tempo, even if it's small changes, can make it feel less robotic.
You will get like a cool like kind of ebb and flow, especially if you're trying to create an organic performance.
Right.
You know, the best way to get an organic performance is to actually perform it, right? That is the best way. But because skills are limited, or maybe you just want to just do it with a mouse, I mean, there's a lot of tools you can use, and it's a lot of attention to detail.
Okay.
And it's also like, know what your samples are, know what your samples are capable of, all right? Okay.
All right.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Cool. All right, we'll do this question, and then I guess we'll go to Nabil, and Nabil can talk about what he worked on.
He's been up to, yeah.
All right, this is a 2-part question.
Cool.
So I got a remix idea. I'm ready. I sit down. I open up, FL Studio, and I chart out my drum part, right? And now I have 100 hi-hats and 200 bass drums and 500 snare samples to choose from. Like, how do I figure out which ones sound like what's in my head?
Yeah.
And follow-up preemptively is, what if I said bass line instead? Is that any different?
Say that second question again?
What if instead of the drum part, it's the bass line?
Okay. So first part, how do you pick the sounds that you want, right? This goes back to what I said earlier. Like, what genre are you thinking, right? You're thinking...
let's say indie rock.
Yeah. Okay. So you need to listen to a lot of that kind of music if you want to write in it, first of all. Mm-hmm. So you need to have a good idea of what the drums would sound like in that genre of music. And then you want to make sure that you actually have those samples. FL Studio comes with a lot of samples, but also FL Studio's percussion samples basically like you have a wave file which is a kick drum, you have a wave file which is a snare drum, you have a wave file which is a hi-hat, a closed hi-hat, and then an open hi-hat, and then a ride cymbal, right? So what you want to sort of move towards is using more of like a drum kit, which is like sort of like a sample library where all of it's grouped together.
Yeah, the problem is in this example, I have like 200 different drum kits to choose from, right?
Delete half of them.
Yeah.
Make your life easier.
So what you can do, you just write, and I do this all the time. You write a drum pattern, and then you sit there, you play it, and then you just hit down, and you just listen to what it sounds like, and you just scroll through them. Honestly, sometimes that's what it takes. You're just like, all right, this one sucks, this one sucks, this one sucks. Some of these like library browsers have like their drum kits and like stuff tagged up. Like if you've ever used Massive before, Massive lets you like browse your sounds based on like different keywords. Like, oh, this is synthetic sounding, this is synthetic, and this is a bass, and this is like a bell. Or
I forget the name of it, but there's actually software that just recently came out that uses artificial intelligence to auto-categorize and characterize samples on your computer. So your specific problem of I have too many kick drums and I don't know what they sound like, that software may actually be relevant. The name is escaping me right now. One thing I might add, you pull up a kick drum and it seems like it's the wrong one. Spend a little time to see if you could tweak it. A lot of times the problem with a kick is the decay, and just by altering the envelope and cutting it off so that there is less of a decay and just getting the attack will give you what you need, and sometimes you can layer kick drums. There's a lot more emphasis nowadays, especially with trap and all of the like 800 different 808 sounds, on taking a kick and actually tailoring it to your needs. So I would say spend a little time at getting proficient in the basics of sample editing in whatever DAW you're using, because sometimes you can take a kick, doesn't sound right, and you just apply a filter or you change the envelope and it does sound right. So maybe that AI software will work for you, but I would stress that it is worth investing some time in learning how to just make minor tweaks, especially for something like a kick and a snare, which are like crucial to the song working.
yeah, and then when you find the right sounds, just like save a template in your DAW. You know, just be like, okay, these are the sounds I always use. Just make a template, and then it's like when you can load it up again, you're like, oh, this is the drum kit that I always use because I made it. You know. So your second question was about bass lines.
Right, it's the same question, but instead of I've got 500 different snares, it's like I've got all these different bass synths. It's basically the same answer.
Right. Yeah. So basically, I think Dave was right in a little bit. I know he might have been joking, but like, yeah, delete maybe half of those. You probably don't need 500 different bass guitar like sounds. Maybe
I've got like 8 terabytes of samples, so I really can't judge.
I have so many too, but like I always go. I have my favorites. So here's the thing, right? I mentioned earlier I mostly use free sound fonts for like most of my composing and arranging career, and then I recently got into using more like stuff that I bought, right? But there are still old free sounds that I go back to because I like them. I'm comfortable with them. I know how to write for them. They're, like, objectively speaking, inferior to the stuff that I've paid money for. But because I've used them before and I like them and I know how to get good sounds out of them, I know how to manipulate them to make them sound pretty good. That's why I use them all the time. So it's good to have just like favorites that you're always going to go back to.
If your DAW has like a star function and you find something that you like, use it.
Yeah.
Definitely good advice, I think. One thing I'll note though, I'm kind of a word freak. If you have that many samples, as you go through them, try to pay attention to the names of the samples because you will see patterns. For example, in terms of bass, like a sub is going to sound, anything with sub in the name is going to have a certain characteristic, low high pass or low pass filter or whatever. Or if you're dealing with electric bass, like a slap bass is going to sound different from a fretless bass.
Yeah.
Having that musical vernacular for the different types of instruments and even different types of synths, like a Moog is going to sound different from a Matrix.
Anytime you see the word acid, you know exactly what
303, yeah.
You know?
So that'll save you some time, especially if you have a large sample library, knowing the word for the sound that you're looking for and just being able to search. I recently became a convert to Ableton Live because its browser lets you find the sounds you're looking for and audition them all from the same screen. So it's expensive, but I really love it for that exact reason. Bitwig has some similar stuff that it can do. Does that cover the question, or?
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. So we will get to your questions, but we're going to talk to Nabil first.
Yeah, we gotta check in
Nabil,
with
are you?
Nabil.
We were going to check in with you earlier, but we didn't. But it's like 9:34 right now. So let's see what you got.
Okay.
So Nabil was working on a remix from Delta Rune. Now you got started earlier today.
Yeah, I had some prep because, especially because Toby Fox is a very good composer, and sometimes it's hard to figure out what he is actually doing.
Yeah.
So I needed some prep time to look at the source tune and really start to understand it.
So you did this all by ear, right? You didn't use a MIDI.
No, I didn't.
Okay, so we will talk about that in a little bit, but you did everything by ear. So you
Yeah.
listened to the song, you listened critically, you analyzed it, you had your keyboard in front of you, and you were figuring things out.
Doing a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, transcribed.
Yeah, so you were doing kind of a little bit of transcription.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
So take it away, Nabil.
So should I play it first or should I talk about it?
You can, what do you guys want? You just want to hear it first
Wanna
and
hear
then, yeah, okay.
I think they want to hear it.
He wants to hear it. This guy, Ninja Konoha Village, wants to hear it, so. All right, so let's turn this up. You got the MAGFest Colossus roar.
So that's the first section, and then I started working on the next section of the source tune.
Okay.
Which it'll transit. I didn't like make any transitions or anything because that stuff starts to get very nuanced, and I have to sit down and take more time.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm trying to just like get the basics of the source tune.
Okay.
So I moved to the B section, which has a slightly different chord progression. And that's the B section. And
Right.
then, like if I was to arrange this further, I would start adding like improvisation, which is what he did in the original source tune.
Yep.
And I would like go back to the main melody and build an arrangement out that way.
Right, okay.
So that's actually good because one of the things we haven't really talked about is just some of the basics of song structure.
Yeah.
For example, most people know like verse, chorus, and then you've also got the bridge. What you'll also find in a lot of video game arrangements is that there'll be a break where the drums will drop out, and sometimes almost everything will drop out other than like pads or something, and it'll be very serene.
Yeah.
And then there'll be a build. Builds are big in EDM, build back up, snare roll.
One thing Nabil mentioned was the A section and the B section, right? So that's basically, he's got this one section where it's like, this is the melody, these are the chords, this is the bass line, this is the percussion. And now we have another section, which is different melody, different chords, different bass line, different percussion. A lot of times in regular songwriting, that's like verse and chorus, right? You have your A, B songwriting stuff, right? And then, you get to the bridge and that's C. It's just another way of saying this is the A section, this is the B section. A lot of times, when I write remixes, what I'll do is I'll have my A section, which is from one song from a video game, and then from that same game, I'll use a different song for my B section, right? So that's another way of doing video game remixes.
Multi-source arrangement from the same game, multi-source arrangement from the same series, and then like DJ Mystics, who hasn't been active lately, but he used to combine like 3 different sources from 3 different games.
Sonic Heroes, Final Fantasy VII, and then like...
crazy stuff.
I think maybe I should break down a little bit what was going on.
Nabil, why don't you break down what you were doing? You want to go back to the A section?
If I still have Wi-Fi, I can bring up the original again. Let's see. what stuck out at me at this track was that the backing track, the bass line and the chords are like very active, and they are providing like the very catchy energy of the song, which makes it so enjoyable to listen to. So that was what I started with. So I looked at the bass line, and I didn't create a bass line that was exactly the same, but I looked at the notes that Toby Fox was writing, and I created a bass line that had a similar harmonic progression. And just because I do lots of sound design stuff, I layered this with a synth to make it a little thicker in the mix. Now they're both getting the same MIDI data. I'm just layering two different sounds to make them bigger.
So Nabil, for the slap bass, just as a point of illustration, could you bring up the plugin that you're using or the sample library just so people could see?
Sure.
Oh, is it Shreddage? Mm-hmm. Oh, sweet.
Is this available yet?
Happens to be a sample library that Nabil worked on, so this is some product placement here.
Don't tell anyone you saw this, or I'll have to kill all of you.
This is going to be on MAGFest YouTube channel.
An example of a plugin. So this is a plugin called Contact, which is very popular. There are thousands of libraries for it, of which Shreddage is a very good series of libraries from Impact Soundworks.
Thank you.
TM. But Contact being a plugin that does not come with the DAW, but that you have to purchase separately, and then you have to purchase libraries separately, although it has a library of its own. So now you start talking about a little bit more
list
money.
of instruments, I have like plugins loaded. You see, I have Contact 5 again. I have Serum, which is the name of a synthesizer that I use. So you can just basically, when you download plugins from the internet, depending on what DAW you're using, you'll just get them in a list, and you can start adding them and writing music for them.
Nabil, what DAW are you using?
So this is Presonus Studio One by the company Presonus. And I think it's very easy to get into, and it has a workflow that's very applicable to other software as well. So it's a very good primer for getting into the world of audio workstations.
So yeah, just real quickly, since we're talking about software that now is getting into the hundreds of dollars, a couple notes, because we're not all made of money. If you're in college or even I think high school, a lot of these companies have academic discounts. Spitfire has like a 30% academic discount, for example, but almost all of them will have some form of academic discount. Use it, even if you're part-time, if their policy allows for it. The other thing is, even though it's tempting, when something new comes out to just grab it up, or when you need it to grab it up, if you can wait for Black Friday sales and end-of-year sales, you'll get stuff at a 50% discount.
Yeah, Native Instruments does a huge sale during the summer. And it's like 50% off of stuff, so you can get like a lot of stuff for way cheaper.
Pluginboutique.com, I gotta say again, because that's where I've bought probably 75% of my stuff from. They will have sales where they'll do a plugin for $1, and then later that year, they will be selling it for $50. So you just be patient, and you can save a lot of money on some of this stuff.
So Nabil, you want to continue with what you were talking about?
Yeah, so I laid out the sort of that driving foundation of the song. So once I had that, I wanted to give drums to it because I needed like a drum line. So I just wrote basically kind of like a basic drum line and then started adding a little like flourishes to it.
Yeah.
So I'll just do the drums by itself, and then I'll do the drums and the bass together.
Yeah.
And then with the bass line.
So just something I want to point out real quick. If you listen to the bass line and you listen to the drums, those two are in sync, right? They accent in the same places.
They line up.
They line up, right? So bass line and drums, you'll see that a lot in a lot of different genres of music, where the bass line and the drums are really like a team. They're sort of working together. A lot of times in jazz combos, they're called the rhythm section. The bass player is part of the rhythm section. So it's really important when you're writing music to sort of think about how your percussion and your bass line are going to interact with each other. All right.
Just one additional note, just relevant to what we're seeing on the screen right now. up at the very top, they're kind of compressed, but I guess like, oh, now they're really super compressed, and now they're wider. Those are the tracks, the individual instruments and the tracks, but then Studio One and a lot of other DAWs, if you double click on the track in the same screen, you can see the individual notes on what's called a piano roll, which looks like a piano laid out vertically, and then you get the individual notes with durations. So if you want to edit an actually sequenced part, you do so usually via the piano roll.
Yeah.
So that is the section down at the bottom is sort of like a zoom in of the track at the top that you're highlighted. I think
a cool feature they added recently, actually, in this one is you can actually snap the zoom and scroll so that they're always vertically in sync between the bottom and the top, which is very, very helpful when you're like seeking around and making edits.
Yeah, each DAW has its own workflow features that people get used to and love. And Studio One, the nice thing about it is they've gone pretty quickly from version 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and they've added a lot of stuff like that.
I also wanted to make, you were talking about affordability before. I wanted to comment on that because nowadays you can actually get like top-end stuff using subscription models, like cloud-based subscription models, and they're not that bad. So right now I'm only using like default Studio One effects plugins, but if I had
Splice.
So there's Splice where you can actually rent to own like expensive plugins for like $10 a month.
Well, yeah, like Serum, for example.
Like
is
Serum. Serum is one of their first rent-to-own plugins.
For $10 a month?
Which is this.
Which is funny because there's an infamous screenshot of Kanye, and he was Googling Serum and BitTorrent and trying to pirate it. And it's like, Kanye, come on, you got to have the money for Serum. I don't know what happened there. Don't be like Kanye. But for $10 a month, you can get Serum and you can rent to own. So yeah, and Serum is a really good
into
plugin.
electronic production, like with drum samples and stuff. Splice also does like monthly sample credits. So for like $6 a month, you can get like 200 like any drum samples you want from like the top end.
There's also like sounds.com, I think native instruments.
Sounds.com is another one.
It's like $10 a month, and it's basically like royalty-free samples that you could just use in your music. It's incredible.
Also for like sample libraries, especially like orchestral sample libraries and stuff, East West does something called the Composer Cloud, which is $25 a month, I think, something like that, and you get all of their stuff, which is like
200 gigabytes of
industry standard orchestral sample libraries, everything you'd ever want.
Has been used on Hollywood film.
Composers use them in movies, in like AAA video games.
Right.
I mean,
you
anyway,
get all of that for like $25 a month.
Let's continue with a little bit more of a look at what you wrote.
So so sort of I build things from the ground up. Oftentimes, so I have the bass and I have the drums. Now I want harmony. I want the chords to sort of fill out.
You want to give the whole thing context.
Yeah, that's right. So I have the bass, I have the drums, and now I bring in a piano, and you can see I have multiple voices going on.
Now, did you play this or you moused this?
I moused this in.
Yeah. Okay.
Even though I'm a trained pianist, I still mouse things in.
Yeah.
So I'll just play the harmony by itself,
Yes.
right? Okay. So that's the chords by themselves, and then together with the rhythm section, it starts to glue together a little more.
Cool.
Nice. Later on, I like to, personally, in like my style, like making things really big, so I'll just keep adding layers and layers of stuff. Later on, I add this pad, which is the same chords as the piano, just doing it more like a sustained fashion. Yeah, that's a very distilled version of
what that helps to do is that helps to fill in the spaces in between notes that aren't playing anything.
And then I also added rhythm guitars.
So pads are for pad.
Yep.
And then all this comes together, it sounds like this. And then I start adding the melody, which I used a square lead for. It's a very simple oscillator, but with a lot of reverb and delay, it can really hold its own in a mix.
So Nabil, I don't know what you're about to show, but can you also show us like that square lead without the reverb and delay, like
sure,
before and after effect chain?
So let me show first what it sounds like in the mix
Yeah.
with the reverb and delay, and then I'll take the effects off to show what happens when you do that. So that's with reverb and delay, which helps glue it to the same space. But if I took all that stuff off, find it here and here. So it might be hard to hear because we're actually in a big
There's still
room
some
with a lot of
reverb, but I think it's
reverb
the
in
room,
it.
yeah.
Like room reverb, but it's like a lot.
Well, the point I was just trying to make is that a lot of times, especially with like lower grade samples, although that's just a square wave, so it's not really relevant. By creatively applying effects, you can get bad samples to sound good, and also by creatively applying effects, you can just make your music more interesting. And there are a lot of genres that really lean on creative effects application. A lot of EDM stuff primarily, but generally speaking, you've got reverb and delay are your two main. Reverb is like sort of like a hall effect like we have here. Delay is more like a repeating echo type thing. But then on top of that, you've got thickening effects like a chorus or a phaser.
filter, flanger,
You've got
phaser.
distortion, and then what you'll hear in a lot of retro music is something called a bit crusher, which actually intentionally reduces the quality of the sample down to where it sounds like it's coming out of an NES almost.
Yeah.
There are bit crushers that will emulate the NES specifically.
Yeah. Okay, so we have 9 minutes left in the panel. Do you want to do a quick overview of the B section, or should we go back to questions?
I mean, I guess we could. It was sort of unfinished, but basically, I again started from the chords as like the starting point. So I actually started with a bass line which matches the chord progression, and this is much simpler than the first one. It's just and then I started building the harmonies with that in the synth pads that I had going before. And then for the B section, in the original track, he keeps the same sort of groove, but I actually wanted to change the drum line and make it more into like, we call it 4 on the floor, I guess. And then together, it comes together like this. And then in the original, he also adds a harmony to it. And then it goes back into the main groove.
So 2 years ago, I think, or 3 years ago, we did this panel, and it was you and Andrew Lewis, Ocean's Andrew, and he actually ended up submitting the FF6 mix that he did during the panel.
That was Andrew in Flex Style.
Yeah.
Yeah. You should do the same with this. You could be our first Delta Moon mix. No? Did anyone have questions specifically about what Nabil's been showing us, or otherwise?
If you have a question, there's a microphone right here.
True. Okay.
Okay, and also if you have questions from before that we didn't get to,
Yeah,
we have
any questions we have?
We have
about
7 minutes.
7 minutes.
Let's go.
So I was wondering how you guys make sure you keep the soul or theme or the style of a song when you're doing a remix across, say, a different genre when you're doing a particular remix or in a remix album. Say like when you're taking Sonic 2 and going heavy metal with it. How do you make sure you keep the same feel for the song?
Right.
In an entirely separate genre.
Sometimes you don't.
That was what I was going to say. Yeah.
Sometimes you don't.
It's subjective.
Yeah, it's really subjective. It's about when you're arranging something, especially when you do arrangements that are as transformative as OC Remix can get. Sometimes it just comes down to what the arranger feels. I have this one. There's the love theme from Final Fantasy IV, Rose's theme. That song. I've had a work in progress from like 10 years ago. It's a bossa nova version of that song, right? That song does not sound bossa nova in the game, right? No. But because of what I'm using in terms of instrumentation, strings, vibes, light percussion, it sort of does retain a kind of romantic feel. So it's hard to sometimes like maintain the feel, especially if you're trying to do something very transformative. Sometimes we call them more conservative arrangements. Sometimes like arrangements
covers.
Like, okay, yeah. It's Chemical Plant from Sonic 2, and it's like EDM, which is kind of similar to what the song already is, a little bit, like funk, a little bit. Mm-hmm. I'm not really sure. Dave?
Yeah. No, I mean, the answer is subjective, and the answer is that sometimes you don't. Now, this is something that Overclock Remix is sort of ideological about, right? Because we like arrangements that change it up. To me, the ultimate question is, does it work? Like, does it work musically? Not necessarily does it maintain the quote-unquote spirit of the original, because what we find, there's a certain type of fan, and there's tons of different types of fans, that's cool. There's a certain type of fan who very strongly associates that piece of music with that character from that point in the game and that plot, and if you change it from a minor key to a major key, or if you change the tempo and make it a lot faster or more aggressive, they hate it. And they hate it because in their mind, they're so attached to the narrative that it just doesn't work for them anymore in that capacity. Our standard, my personal standard, and also kind of our standard as the site, is whether it works musically. Like, does it stand on its own as a piece of music that makes sense still, where you can hear the melody and you can hear how the source inspired it, but the soul doesn't necessarily have to still be there if you're using those sort of narrative standards. So we see a mix. We see covers that are pretty similar, where the spirit is there simply because it's basically very close to the original, so why wouldn't it be? We also see things that are transformative, where you can still map it back onto the game, and you can imagine it playing in game, and the vibe would be different, but the soul is still there. And then we see stuff that's just way out there that you could never imagine playing the game to, and that no longer really resonates with the narrative of the game. But personally, I think that's still okay. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
I figured it was going to be very theoretical instead of more technical. Just keep the melody or whatever.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Well, some people are not melody-centric, and I really am. And so if you don't get the melody in there, then it's hard to do much more.
Yeah.
Shark?
I mean, I think we covered it. Yeah.
Yes. Cool. Well, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Hey, this is one for people who are really into mashups or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I know obviously it will never be perfect without the original sources, but for someone who wants to isolate the vocals out of a song or vice versa, are there any tricks of the trade you would offer? Any good plugins that do that?
I mean, it's hard.
Separation? Stems?
If you want to spend $1,000, there's this plugin called RX7 that just came out recently. It's the 7th version of Isotope's audio restoration suite of plugins. And it actually has basically music separation driven by artificial intelligence. So it actually analyzes your source track using machine learning database of what vocals sound like, and you can turn down the rest of the accompaniment via faders and keep the vocal. And I've personally tried it, and I'd say 90 to 95% the way there, in getting the rest of the music out and having a perfect vocal. And it's way better than any other trick you could possibly do.
Is it RX7?
RX7. It's very expensive though.
It's pricey, yeah. There's cheaper options. I forget the name of it, but there's one that does exactly that. Separates vocals from rhythm from drums, and it gives you 3 stems as a result. And you're going to have to leverage machine learning for stuff like that, and that's what they're starting to do. There's also repitching software if you're not necessarily extracting out different parts, but you just want to change the pitch of a part. There's Melodies is very famous, and then a company called Synaptic has pitch map, I think.
Yeah.
So Unfortunately, most of that type of software is usually a little bit more expensive, but it's coming down.
One cheat that a lot of mashup artists used was hacking Guitar Hero because it's all stems. So a lot of the really clean mashups that you hear are all like, oh yeah, I just hacked Guitar Hero, got the stem out, and then like did it that way.
That's one way to do it.
It's pretty crazy, yeah.
Awesome, thanks.
Yep. All right, last question. We have 1 minute left. Let's go.
This might be a loaded question. So you have your song or your remix or cover, you finish it. What do you have to worry about after that point in terms of licensing and ownership? You know, it's not you didn't write the song.
So this is a loaded question.
Yeah.
Well, it's also a long answer.
It's a long answer, yeah.
I guess from our perspective, Overclock Remix is unique. There are other groups that do sort of what we do, which is free arrangements. There is no licensing.
Right.
We believe, this is our official line at least, that what we do is in the spirit of what's called fair use, which is a part of the copyright code in the United States of America. Not every country has a fair use clause, but we do still. That lets you, for educational purposes, for freedom of expression purposes, if the work is transformative, essentially lets you play and remix and just experiment with ideas. If, on the other hand, you want to sell it, and there's a commercial angle, and you want to market it, under a name that refers to the game and things of that nature on Spotify or whatever, there's a company called Soundrop. There's a company called Louder, Loudr, and Soundrop, Soundrop. They will handle licensing for you. Usually what they're doing is mechanical licensing. That's another clause in the US Copyright Code that if it's been released in the US market, you can get a mechanical license for anything to do a cover of it with a standard flat licensing fee. Those companies will help you with that to a certain extent. But downside there is not everything's been released in the US market. A lot of great Japanese video game music has not yet been released here, and thus mechanical licensing is not always available. For what we do for free, in a non-commercial, non-profit capacity, you don't have to do anything, just submit it to us and you're good to go. Fair use. But if you want to sell something, people do that all the time. Those are the two big players that I'm aware of, Soundrop and Louder, that can help you with that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cool. So it is 10 o'clock. That is basically the end time of our panel. So we will be hanging out outside if you guys want to ask us any more questions. Thank you all for coming to our panel. This is I think the 5th time we've done this panel, maybe. I don't remember when we started doing this one.
Well, some people are coming back, so they must like something. I don't know.
Yeah, so thank you all for your questions. It was really, really fun. And we have another panel. We have our main Overclock Remix panel tomorrow in panels 1 at 4:30?
4:30 tomorrow, panels 1. Please be there. We will have prizes. We want to give away things, and that panel will be less technical and more just focused on Overclock Remix in general, what we've been up to. There should be, if Jose shows up or sends me the file, an exclusive preview of the next album that we're going to release, hopefully in January or February of this year, which is called Chronopolis, and it's the soundtrack to Chrono Cross remixed. So that's exclusive MAGFest debut, and a lot of other fun stuff too.
Yeah, okay. We got to go.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.